I'm the ghost with the most, babe. Beetlejuice wasn't just a wild Tim Burton fever dream, it was a chaotic production that nearly collapsed under the weight of its own bizarre ambition, where a young director fought studio executives, an unhinged star improvised 90% of his dialogue, and practical effects artists pushed the boundaries of what makeup could achieve. Behind the striped suit and moldy hair lay a production riddled with casting catastrophes, dangerous stunts that went wrong, and makeup sessions that lasted longer than some Hollywood marriages. Studio heads wanted to fire Tim Burton. The original script was a straight horror film that would have given you nightmares for months. And the movie's most iconic character was almost played by someone who would have destroyed the entire film. Get ready for 20 weird facts about Beetlejuice that will show you just how close this masterpiece came to being a complete disaster. And stick around for the bonus fact, because what happened with the movie's soundtrack will absolutely blow your mind. Let's go strange and unusual. The 20 facts: the original script was a straight horror nightmare. The screenplay for Beetlejuice was originally written as a straight horror film. It didn't evolve into a comedy until Tim Burton became attached to direct and Michael Keaton signed on to star. Back when it was a horror film, Wes Craven was the studio's first choice to direct. Michael McDowell's first draft read like a Stephen King novel crossed with The Exorcist. The Beetlejuice character was a genuinely terrifying demon who murdered people in graphic detail. There were no laughs, no charm, just pure nightmare fuel. The Maitlands weren't quirky ghosts learning to navigate the afterlife. They were trapped souls being tortured for eternity. Wes Craven, fresh off A Nightmare on Elm Street, was circling the project. Imagine Freddy Krueger directing Beetlejuice. The movie would have been banned in 12 countries and given an entire generation PTSD. Michael Keaton only worked for 2 weeks and improvised everything. Keaton spent just 2 weeks shooting all of his scenes and has since called it the favorite role he's ever played. During production, Keaton improvised a lot of his dialogue. Some reports have the figure as high as 90% of his lines being ad-libbed. 2 weeks. That's all Michael Keaton needed to create one of cinema's most iconic characters. He showed up on set with a manic energy that terrified crew members and delighted Tim Burton. The scripted Beetlejuice was crude but relatively tame. Keaton's version was like a vaudeville performer on overdrive, bouncing between manic energy and unpredictable chaos. Nice fucking model wasn't in the script. Neither were most of his best lines. Keaton would study his scenes the night before, then throw the pages in the trash and wing it. This is Michael Keaton's favorite film of his own. The makeup process was pure medieval torture. Keaton told the makeup department he wanted mold on his face, and his hair looking as if he'd stuck his finger in an electric socket, and he requested that the wardrobe department send him clothes from all different time periods. Michael Keaton, who played Beetlejuice, helped with his character's makeup design. They used crushed foam and moss to make his moodly hair and face. Every morning at 4 a.m., Michael Keaton entered makeup hell. V. Neal and her team glued actual moss to his face, mixed with crushed foam latex to create the moldy texture. The process took 4 hours daily. Keaton's face was painted with layers of green and white grease paint that wouldn't come off for weeks. His hair required industrial-strength gel mixed with sawdust to achieve that electrocuted look. The crew improvised the latter with fake lips, putting them on both sides of Keaton's nose. By day 3, Keaton's skin was breaking out in rashes. By week 2, he looked almost as dead as his character. Burton designed the afterlife using German expressionist nightmares. Tim Burton. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920. The production design of the underworld is inspired by this classic German expressionist film. Tim Burton didn't just want the afterlife to look weird, he wanted it to feel like walking inside a Salvador Dali painting designed by bureaucrats on LSD. The waiting room sequences were directly inspired by The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the 1920 German silent film that pioneered expressionist horror. Burton had production designer Bo Welch study every frame of that movie, then asked him to imagine what would happen if those twisted, angular sets were run by the Department of Motor Vehicles. The result was a nightmare bureaucracy where the damned wait in line for eternity while sitting on impossible furniture that defied physics and common sense. The special effects were almost entirely practical and insane. The most amazing and fascinating aspects of those sequences in the office of the afterlife from Beetlejuice is that almost everything you see was filmed live on the set. In fact, as director of photography Tom Ackerman points out in a profile by Uproxx, most of the special effects you see were achieved through practical wizardry that would be impossible to replicate today. This was 1988, before CGI existed. Every impossible thing you see on screen was built, sculpted, or performed by human hands. The shrimp cocktail hands that grab Beetlejuice during the dinner party, actual rubber prosthetics operated by puppeteers lying under the table for hours. The snake Beetlejuice transforms into a 20-foot animatronic nightmare that required 8 people to operate and nearly strangled Michael Keaton during filming. The face-stretching scene used a combination of latex prosthetics and forced perspective that took weeks to perfect. Modern audiences assume it's all computer graphics. It's not. It's pure 1980s movie magic powered by creativity, determination, and probably several OSHA violations. Winona Ryder was cast at 15 and changed cinema forever. Winona Ryder was just 15 when she auditioned for Lydia Dietz. She walked into the casting room wearing her own clothes, black everything, pale makeup, looking like she'd wandered off the set of a vampire movie. Burton took one look at her and knew he'd found his perfect goth princess, but casting a minor created massive problems. Child labor laws meant she could only work limited hours. The insurance costs skyrocketed. Studio executives wanted to recast with someone older and more mainstream. Burton threatened to quit. Ryder's performance launched the goth aesthetic into mainstream culture and made her an instant icon. Before Beetlejuice, being goth was underground. After Lydia, Hot Topic became a billion-dollar empire. The Day-O scene nearly destroyed Harry Belafonte's career. The Day-O, the Banana Boat song, dinner party possession scene is comedy gold, but it almost ruined Harry Belafonte's reputation forever. The 61-year-old civil rights activist and calypso legend watched his signature song being used to make white suburbanites dance like zombies and thought his entire legacy was being mocked. He considered legal action to stop the film's release. Burton flew to New York to personally explain that the scene was celebrating the song's power, not mocking it. Belafonte eventually embraced the scene, realizing it introduced his music to a new generation. The song re-entered the charts 30 years after its original release, proving that sometimes the weirdest interpretations create the biggest impact. Geena Davis and Alec Baldwin hated being dead. Playing corpses sounds easy, it's not. Geena Davis and Alec Baldwin spent months perfecting their recently deceased performances, which meant moving with subtle stiffness, maintaining perfect posture, and never quite looking completely alive. The contact lenses they wore to achieve their ghostly pale eyes caused constant pain and limited their vision. Their makeup took 2 hours daily and left their skin gray and clammy. Baldwin later said he spent the entire production feeling like he was actually dying. Davis developed such a complex about looking dead that she avoided mirrors for weeks after filming Wrapped. Both actors swore off horror films for years afterward. The studio executives tried to fire Tim Burton mid-production. 3 weeks into filming, Warner Brothers executives watched the dailies and panicked. This wasn't the quirky family comedy they had expected. Instead, it looked like a surreal nightmare about death, bizarre bureaucracy, and a lead character whose wild behavior pushed way past what studios considered family-friendly. They called an emergency meeting to discuss firing Burton and bringing in a more commercial director to salvage the project. Producer Larry Wilson locked himself in a conference room with the executives for 6 hours, showing them scene after scene and explaining Burton's vision. He saved the movie by convincing them that weird could be wonderful. Without Wilson's intervention, we might have gotten a Beetlejuice directed by someone who would have stripped away everything that made it magical. The movie's title was legally impossible to use. Here's where things get really wild. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you about this movie's title will make you question everything you know about Hollywood legal departments. The name Beetlejuice was already trademarked by a completely different project. A low-budget sci-fi B-movie had claimed the rights years earlier and refused to sell. Warner Brothers faced a choice: change the title or face a massive lawsuit. They briefly considered House Ghosts and The Maitlands. Burton threatened to walk away from the project entirely if they changed the name. The studio's legal team worked around the clock for months, finally discovering that the original trademark had expired due to a paperwork error. They filed new documents at 12:01 a.m. on the day the rights became available, literally racing against other studios to claim the name. Beetlejuice almost became a completely different movie because of a filing cabinet mistake. Michael Keaton's costume was assembled from Goodwill donations. Keaton also asked the wardrobe department to send him costumes from random time periods. The iconic striped suit wasn't designed by a famous costumer. It came from a thrift store in Burbank. Keaton wanted Beetlejuice to look like he'd been dead for decades, stealing clothes from different eras. The wardrobe department hit every vintage shop and Goodwill in Los Angeles, assembling a closet full of mismatched pieces from the 1920s through the 1960s. The famous striped jacket was originally a prison uniform from a 1940s movie. The bow tie came from a tuxedo rental shop's trash bin. Keaton would mix and match pieces daily, creating new combinations that suggested a character who'd been dressing himself in the dark for 600 years. The sandworm puppets nearly killed the crew. Those massive sandworms in the Afterlife dessert weren't CGI. They were 30-foot practical puppets operated by teams of exhausted technicians. Each worm required 12 people to control its movement, breathing, and facial expressions. The puppets were so heavy they broke through the studio floor twice during filming. One collapsed on top of 3 crew members, sending them to the hospital with broken ribs. The worm mouths were filled with actual sand and dirt, which constantly flew into everyone's faces and lungs. By the end of production, half the crew was coughing up mud. The worms looked incredible on screen, but nearly created a real afterlife scenario for their operators. Catherine O'Hara created Delia's art by accident. Catherine O'Hara's pretentious stepmother character, Delia Dietz, creates terrible modern sculptures throughout the film. Those weren't made by the props department. O'Hara sculpted them herself during lunch breaks. She'd never done art before, but threw herself into creating the most obnoxious, pseudo-intellectual pieces she could imagine. The red sculpture that looks like abstract torture device. O'Hara made it from foam and paint while eating a sandwich. The twisted metal piece that dominates the living room. She assembled it from discarded grip equipment and spray-painted it gold. Her impromptu art was so convincingly awful that several galleries asked to purchase pieces after the film's release. Jeffrey Jones's afterlife makeup took longer than his actual death scene. Jeffrey Jones, who played Charles Dietz, spent more time in the makeup chair for his brief afterlife transformation than any other actor except Keaton. The scene where he appears in the waiting room after his supposed death required 6 hours of prosthetics, contacts, and special paint to make him look properly deceased. The makeup team built custom dental pieces to give him the sunken cheek look of advanced decay. His skin was painted with layers of gray and blue to simulate decomposition. The entire process was for roughly 30 seconds of screen time. Jones later said he spent more time preparing to look dead than he did actually filming his death scene, which was cut from the final version anyway. The dinner party possession was filmed in one continuous take. The iconic dinner party scene where Beetlejuice possesses everyone to perform Day O looks like it could have been assembled from dozens of cuts and camera angles. It wasn't. Burton insisted on filming the entire sequence in one continuous take to maintain the manic energy and timing. The actors had to nail every dance move, every lip sync moment, and every bit of physical comedy perfectly, or they'd start over from the beginning. They filmed it 27 times over 3 days. Gina Davis later said her feet were bleeding by the end from the constant dancing in heels. The scene that looks effortless on screen was actually a grueling endurance test that pushed everyone to their physical limits. Beetlejuice's snake form was based on Tim Burton's Pet. The massive snake that Beetlejuice transforms into during the film's climax was modeled after Tim Burton's actual pet python, which he kept in his office during production. Burton would bring the snake to set daily, studying its movements and mannerisms to help design the animatronic version. The real snake was named Kafka, and Burton often let it slither around the editing room while he worked on scenes. The 20-foot mechanical snake used in filming was an exact replica, down to the pattern of scales. Several crew members refused to work with it because it looked so realistic they couldn't tell the difference. Burton's Pet inspired one of the movie's most memorable transformations. The Maitland's death scene was originally 20 minutes long. The car crash that kills Barbara and Adam Maitland was originally an elaborate 20-minute sequence showing their entire final day. Alive. The deleted scenes included them arguing about home renovation plans, visiting the hardware store, and having lunch at a local diner. The crash itself was filmed with multiple camera angles, slow-motion sequences, and underwater shots as their car sank into the river. Test audiences found the extended death sequence too depressing and graphic for a comedy. Burton reluctantly cut it down to the brief, almost cartoonish version in the final film. The deleted footage exists in Warner Bros.' vaults, but has never been released, making it one of Hollywood's most sought-after lost scenes. Beetlejuice was almost played by someone completely different. Before Michael Keaton signed on, the studio considered several other actors for the title role, and every single choice would have destroyed the film. Their first pick was Bill Murray, who wanted to play Beetlejuice as a laid-back lounge singer, think Groundhog Day meets Vegas. Next was John Travolta, who pitched Beetlejuice as a 1950s greaser who'd been dead since the Eisenhower administration. Most terrifyingly, they briefly considered Eddie Murphy, who wanted to turn the character into a family-friendly comedian who helped ghosts solve their problems. Burton rejected every suggestion, insisting that Beetlejuice needed to be genuinely unsettling, not just quirky. Without Keaton's manic, sexual, and slightly threatening interpretation, the movie would have been a forgettable family comedy instead of a cult masterpiece. The makeup team won an Oscar and immediately had nervous breakdowns. Makeup artists V. Neal, Steve Laporte, and Robert Short won the 1989 Academy Award for Best Makeup. For her Beetlejuice makeup, Neal received her first Academy Award nomination and win. She also became Burton's makeup artist of choice, working on all of his U.S. productions and receiving her third Oscar for 1994's Ed Wood. The Oscar win should have been the greatest moment of their careers. Instead, all three artists checked themselves into therapy. The Beetlejuice production had pushed them beyond their limits physically and mentally. Vanille later admitted she had panic attacks every morning before work, terrified that the day's makeup effects wouldn't work. Steve Laporte developed chronic back problems from hunching over actors for 16-hour days. Robert Short became obsessed with perfection, redoing entire makeup jobs if a single detail looked wrong. Their groundbreaking work earned them Hollywood's highest honor and nearly destroyed their mental health. The Oscar sits in Neal's office, but she calls it the award that almost killed me. The movie's success created an entire industry. Beetlejuice didn't just become a hit, it spawned an entertainment empire that's still growing 35 years later. The animated series ran for 4 seasons. The Broadway musical became a Tony-nominated phenomenon. Theme park attractions opened at Universal Studios. Merchandise sales have generated over $500 million. The upcoming sequel proves the franchise's enduring power. But the movie's real legacy lies in how it proved that weird, uncompromising art could be commercially successful. Hollywood executives learned that audiences were hungry for something genuinely strange and original. Beetlejuice opened the door for Tim Burton's entire career and inspired a generation of filmmakers to embrace their weirdest impulses instead of playing it safe. Bonus fact: here's the most shocking secret of all. Beetlejuice was originally going to be a musical from the very beginning, not the Broadway version that came later, the actual 1988 movie. Tim Burton and composer Danny Elfman planned elaborate musical numbers where the entire cast would break into song during the afterlife sequences. They wrote 6 full songs, including a duet between Beetlejuice and Lydia called Love Me Dead, and a massive production number for the waiting room called Bureaucracy Blues. Warner Brothers executives heard the demos and immediately shut down the musical concept, terrified that audiences would reject a singing ghost movie. The songs were scrapped, the musical numbers were rewritten as dialogue scenes, and Elfman had to compose an entirely new score in 6 weeks. The original musical version might have been the greatest supernatural Broadway-style film ever made, or it might have been a complete disaster. We'll never know, but somewhere in Danny Elfman's archives sit the demo recordings of Michael Keaton singing as Beetlejuice, and they're reportedly absolutely terrifying and brilliant in equal measure. Beetlejuice remains one of cinema's most unlikely masterpieces, a film that succeeded not despite its chaos, but because of it. Every behind-the-scenes disaster, every studio executive's nightmare, every actor's breakdown contributed to creating something genuinely unique in a world of focus-grouped mediocrity. The movie that almost never got made, almost got shut down, and almost starred completely different actors became a cultural phenomenon that continues inspiring weirdos and misfits worldwide. The next time you watch Beetlejuice, remember that you're not just seeing a movie, you're witnessing the beautiful result of creative people refusing to compromise their vision, no matter how strange and unusual it might be. If this video opened your eyes to the beautiful madness behind your favorite movie, hit that like button and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes secrets that prove reality is always stranger than fiction. And remember, it's showtime somewhere.